Oh, yeah.
Ooh, it's 4 o'clock. Shall I maybe give a couple of minutes for people to get situated?
It's so quiet.
It is. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to check my time really quickly. At 4:01. I might wait until 4:02 to get us started, just to give a couple minutes for those who are coming in.
Hi, Stuart. I see you there.
Haven't seen you actually in quite a while. It's nice to at least catch up virtually.
Welcome, everyone. All right. We are going to go ahead and get started with our discussion with the Willy Street Grocery Co-op board. Welcome to our discussion. Hope that you have enjoyed the sessions that you've attended so far, the up and coming conference. This evening or late afternoon, one might say, Sarah, Ann, and I are going to walk you through the co-op's history, or the Willy Street Grocery Co-op's history. Forgive me for referring to Willy Street Grocery Co-op as the co-op. That's what we do in Madison. So if I do that, that's what I'm talking about, but I will try really hard to retrain my brain really quickly. While we do this, while we go through the history, we will be highlighting the changes and growth that have happened to the co-op and the board of directors over the years. We will be using a metaphor called the stages of development as we do this, and we'll explain that a little bit later in the session, and we have a specific slide to go with it as well, so hopefully that will help. We will have time for Q&A at the end of our session, but feel free to enter your questions in the chat box at any time. We will have one poll for you during our session.
Henry, come do the laundry.
And when we get there, you can find the poll if you scroll down in your, it should just be to the right of where you would view the chat in your up and coming conference window. If you have a hard time finding it, let us know in the chat, and we'll try to help you figure out how to do that. I think that those are all of the logistical details. Did I miss anything? I'm seeing a couple of notes in the chat, but one good reminder is just to mute your mics if you aren't speaking, just so everyone can hear well. So if we don't have any questions or things that need to be gone over logistically, I will go ahead and start the rest of our session. So today, about 40 years after the Willy Street Grocery Co-op incorporated, we have about 34,000 owners. Thank you, Kirsten. I forgot to.
34,000 owners.
About 400 staff members. We have 5 sites, including 3 retail stores, a central office, and an offsite kitchen. We sell around $50 million per year in groceries. And we have a board of directors made up of 9 member owners. And we use the policy governance model to govern the co-op on behalf,
Okay, no, but you also have to start a new one.
on behalf of the co-op.
Don't even.
We, Sarah Ann and I are proud to represent the co-op and feel obligated to say that the Willy Street Co-op did not start here with this many owners, employees, annual sales, or even a board who practice policy governance. So to learn more about where we did start, I'm going to let Ann Hoyt take over for a little while to do that.
So I'm going to start with a description of 4 different stages that we're going to organize our thoughts around and tell you about those. Do you have the slide for those? We will talk about these particular stores. In 1974, which I'll talk about in a minute, we were in that pretty pink square building, and then we went to the other buildings as we grew larger. This is a complex kind of model that we're using, and if you would like copies of it, I think you could get them or let us know. It was not developed by me or anyone in any of us, but it describes the stages of development that boards go through as businesses grow in terms of clothing that they wear. So the first stage, which is the foundation and the building and the, it's someone's bright idea and it actually becomes an actuality, we call the coverall stage. The second stage, which is we call the shirt sleeve stage, is when the board is a working board and doing the work of the business, in this case, a co-op. And the third stage, the blue suit stage, is where the board is managing and not actually doing the work, but managing the work. And then the last stage we're calling black tie. And that's when the board has graduated to governing and not actually managing the activities, the day-to-day activities. So this diagram describes what's going on at each one of the stages of development. And so we're going to use that to talk about the various stages that Willy Street has gone through. Basically, when we started as a buying club, we had very different needs from a board of directors than we have today when we have over 30,000 members. So in the coverall stage, or the infancy stage, you might think of it, those people are the founders of the organization. And they, as I said, they do all the work, and they're really the grassroots people that get the organization going. I'm sure all of you are either in that stage or you've passed through it and it's familiar to you. And I would guess that many of you, having seen some of the people that are here, were in those stages in working with past co-ops as well. The most important thing that gets done at that stage is providing services to the members of the organization. Then in the shirt sleeve stage, the work usually gets to be more than those volunteers can handle. There's growth, and they sometimes have to hire staff to do the work and be there every day or often and get things done. But the focus in that stage is still on operations. still day to day. The planning goes from day to day, week to week, month to month, but often not much more than a year at a time. And you can see the other descriptions there. But it's still, the board is still in serving the members with some limited staff. In the next stage, in the blue suit stage, there's much more need for planning and thinking more forward, more ahead than just 1 year at a time. And by that time, there are enough members, there are enough services being provided that more staff need to be hired. And the board is kind of in a gray area because they're moving out of being deeply involved in just doing the work of the organization and not now doing much more of the planning the work, doing fundraising, financial oversight, starting some governance responsibilities. And often in that stage, and it did happen at Willy Street, the staff became the driving force for the organization. And the board often struggles to figure out, what are they supposed to be doing? Then in the last stage, the black tie stage, essentially, we aren't going to talk much about that because the three of us decided we hadn't reached that stage quite yet at Willy Street. But that's much more a stage where, excuse me, the board is governing, doing all governance. And the responsibilities between board and staff are very clear. And the board is much more involved in oversight and strategic planning, particularly. And that you would consider would be how you would describe maybe a major corporation. So given that those are the stages that we're going through, and we recognize that every co-op goes through stages of development, we wanted to describe for you so you had something to sort of realize we're in a different stage here. We maybe need to change the way we operate as a board, or we maybe need to attract different people to serve on the board with different skills. So as Jeannine told you, we incorporated in 1973. And the whole organization started as a buying club that had been operating for a while. And as most buying clubs do, they often want to start a store. And so they did incorporate and started a store, and they had about 15 people that were working on getting incorporated and getting the store off the ground. And those members, just by their activities and that they were kind of the core of the people that were starting things, became the first directors of the co-op, and they were the ones that signed the incorporation papers. And at that time, and for several years after that, all of the decisions made about how the store was going to be operated were made by all of the members. So they would have these big membership meetings when they were making very operational kinds of decisions. It was fairly unwieldy. They had a small space that they opened up. You saw that in the pictures that went by pretty fast, that square brick building that was the first one on your to the left of your screen. But that was just 900 square feet. And within a year, that wasn't enough space. And by that time, the 6 of the 15 founding members had become essentially the staff of the organization. And they were operating as a collective rather than as a co-op. And they had a lot of identity with this idea of workers collective. And the other founding members were described as having faded into the woodwork and faded away, and they were mostly a figurehead board. By 1977, the organization grew enough to move into a 2,500 square foot store. Membership, staff, and sales increased. The members went in a few years after that from 1,300 to 4,000, and those 6 staff members really couldn't deal with all the work, and there was actually no functioning board by that time. And the membership was so big, they dropped decision making by the members. Several products were added to the product mix, and it was an interesting time. One of the directors from those years that we talked to said, to give you a sense of the politics of the situation, that he realized people were buying more at the co-op, and so he went and bought some shopping carts, and people in the co-op were up in arms because they thought that was a capitalistic and mainstream thing to do. So think of your stores and having your customers upset because you actually were using shopping carts. And at this time, there was, by 1979 particularly, there was a real tension in this co-op between the workers, like I mentioned, who thought that they were really that this was becoming a workers' collective, and the members who thought that they were in a consumer co-op. So the co-op was organized as a consumer co-op, and there was a lot of disagreement about who was doing what. And as a result, the co-op faced a number of operational challenges in 1979, and governance issues. Was the collective in control, or were the members in control? And there was no functioning board of directors. So by 1980 and 81, I'm going to lead you into how Jeannine is going to talk about the next phase. Co-op was losing money. There were a number of operational difficulties, and there was the first ever since 1973 a contested board election. And the board, once they got elected, became, as you would think if it was contested, much more active. And they started to look into board training and to try to help them understand their role and the relationship between the board and management. And after much discussion, in 1980-81, they hired a general manager. And at that point, Jeannine takes over.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, so as Anne described, we have this stages of development, and as Anne, Sarah, and I were talking, we had a difficult time telling exactly when the co-op moved from one stage to the next. And so this section between like 79 and 82 is really when we start to see, like Anne said, some things happen on the staff side where that really planted the seed for a general manager to be hired. The board starts recognizing that, oh, we're getting a little bit too big. We need to start having training. And so that was kind of where we decided that the co-op, or the Willy Street Grocery Co-op, moved into this next stage of the shirt sleeve stage, as it says in the metaphor. So our first general manager was hired in 1982. And at that time, the co-op also put together job descriptions for all of the positions. And so naturally, when the co-op hired their first general manager, the board took on a new role because they were now responsible for managing the general manager. And in conversations with Anya, our current general manager, the board eventually became more strategic because their role had changed, and then so they started looking at the co-op with a different light. They were no longer required to be thinking about the day-to-day and, you know, did someone show up for their shift, but had a little bit more brain space now to think about, okay, where are we going now, and what is coming next. And so in the decade that followed the hiring of our first general manager, the co-op expanded in its space. The board made the decision to increase equity membership, or what we now call fair share, from $5 per person to our current model, which is $58 per person or $93 per couple. The board turned over, as one of the board members that we interviewed said, all 9 seats in 1 year, which we can all only imagine what that would look like, turning over all board seats in 1 year. The board contracted with a worker co-op, so we kind of see this tension between the consumer co-op owners and then the staff. So the board contracted with a worker co-op to run the Willy Street Grocery Co-op, and that was a saving grace for a season. And then they had to turn around and rehire all of the employees who were part of the co-op, the worker co-op, because the worker co-op ended up dissolving. The board experienced some challenges around distributors. And so we had a local distributor that was used, but that local distributor started to have challenges with in-stock product. And so kind of going back and forth, ended up moving to a more regional distributor as a result of inconsistent product stocking. During this season, the shirt sleeve season, board meetings consisted mostly of discussing high priority day-to-day discussion items. Hopefully they had a quorum of directors present so that their formal decisions could be made. Board members were not necessarily trained in specific areas, but kind of learned as they went and tackled the challenges as they came. One past board member mentioned that he always really looked forward to going to CCMA because that was a really great opportunity to meet with other cooperators around the country and have just a lot of opportunity for learning. In this stage, the co-op board had both a finance committee and a future opportunities committee to help the board with their work. So that we kind of see the appearance of committees in this new stage or season. And then directors are moving away from their direct involvement in operations and beginning to assist, and they're being assisted by the general manager to make bigger picture decisions, such as the distributor decision that I mentioned earlier. So as the co-op continued to grow through the end of the 80s and into the early 90s, their needs continued to change. And as a result, the board's activities and focus changed as well. So through the shirt sleeve transition, or stage 2 of cooperative development, the board was the makeup. So the makeup changed from being the original founders, as Anne had said, to being original founders and some recruits from the community, or people who self-identified as being interested in running for the co-op board. The nature of board work changed from working on the foundation of the co-op and helping to ensure the day-to-day operations are running smoothly to more big picture and forward-looking work. Committees are added to the structure, and they now have a hired staff member that they're responsible for overseeing and making sure that the operational function of the co-op is working okay. So we kind of see that, as being the end of the shirt stage era for the Willy Street Grocery Co-op. And I'm going to hand it over to Sarah, who's going to tell us about the next stage of development.
Thanks, Jeannine. I just also want to put a call out for you all to, as we're talking about this, explaining the stages, giving you examples from Willy Street and thinking about your stage, to look at the poll we created for you to let us know what stage your co-op is in and where you're at. And I think you can find that on the Packable site. So just a reminder to, as this sits in, to go ahead and participate in that poll for us. So as Jeannine was saying, kind of figuring out where you transition stages can be a little bit nuanced. And so we saw two sort of big things that happened in the 90s that we think pushed us into this blue suit stage. And one of them was in the early 90s, sales jumped from $1 million to $2.5 million in sales. So there's quite a lift in the management, the membership, and quite a bit of growth in Willy Street. And that was still with one store, with Willy, the kind of flagship Willy Street Grocery Co-op, the Willy East store. Also, we saw that in the late 90s, so in 99, that Willy Street East location also moved. And so Willy Street East moved into a 9,000 square foot building and had a little bit of an expansion. And so within that stage, we learned a lot about how the board was working with management to make those expansion decisions, because this kind of kicked off a series of expansion for Willy Street East. And so we learned that there was often a planning committee in place, so kind of leveraging that committee structure into a planning committee, and that the strategy was often focused on expansion. So the broader picture strategic planning was still a little bit in the background, and there was this kind of growth and how to best strategically expand with the Willy Street Co-op within the Madison community, or at this time in the neighborhood surrounding the streets where Willy Street was founded. And I will say, I know that the name was originally super intentional because there was a commitment to that specific neighborhood and wanting to stay within Willy Street. So at that time, a board or committee would work with Anya to choose the developer and the architect to facilitate the rebuild, the layout of that store. So managing the manager, a little bit removed from day-to-day operations, but that higher level involvement with that long-range planning, like you might see in that pre-sleep stage, and still with really active working committees. In 2004, Willy Street opened up an off-site kitchen, or in 2004, they signed a lease. They opened the kitchen in 2005. This is another example of an opportunities committee shepherding this project or this expansion effort into actuality. Once in 2005, that offsite kitchen cost about $500,000 and ended up with an annual sales of $13.2 million. On this kind of expansion thread, it was in 2010 that the Willy Street Co-op opened their second store, Willy West. And if we go to that fundraising streak, the opening of Willy West involved a pretty high level member bond drive, and there were $600,000 in member bonds that were raised to help with the opening of that location. And so that was a fundraising aspect that the board and management would have been involved in together. And there's also a loan with a local bank that helped that happen. In 2013, there was a remodel, an extensive remodel of that Willy Street East, or that flagship store. And in 2016, an additional store was added called Willy Street North on the north side of Madison. To talk a little bit more about the makeup of the board and the governance model through that period of the last, crazy to think, we're talking about over 4 decades of an involvement for the Willy Street Co-op board. I would say now the board of directors has a governance model. We practice policy governance that started to become active in the early 90s and has continued to become refined and utilized more strategically as a governance model. We have 9 B policies that help with management constraint or limit that general manager activities, but allows them to do their work. We have 10 C policies that manage board process, and 4 D policies or policies that manage the board management connection. And so these are really strong guides for how the board operates and helps us best work with that one employee we have, the manager. We still have that working committee structure. There are 3 key committees. We have our policy committee, our finance committee, and our board development committee that really drives membership and owner engagement. And then we have ad hoc committees that come up to help facilitate work throughout as needed. And currently we have a strategic planning ad hoc committee. It was interesting in talking with other board members how this idea of strategic planning is always on a board's radar, but there's just not always the resources and time to get to it, which I think we can see evident in the stages of development and when you can actually get to a place where you have the capacity, the resources and expertise to start doing that long-term planning. So we are hoping with that strategic planning committee, we can start to help work with management to drive that higher level mission and vision for the board. The board is made up of mostly recruits. We do have elections every year and have a formal process that includes a board application, a statement on why you want to run, and a formal requirement to attend a board meeting before you do run for the board. We also run board orientation sessions and provide a lot of member outreach to garner interest in serving for the board. I would say it was within the last 10 to 15 years, that process for board recruitment and board application process got really formalized. And that it was also, and in the last 5 to 7 years, that we started to compensate the board with more than dinner and store discounts. So currently, a director that serves on the Willy Street board receives a monthly stipend of $200 a month. The vice chair receives $300 a month, and a chair receives $400 a month, since it is still volunteer and kind of helping to offset some costs. I did think one thing that was interesting, or an interesting observation from our current general manager was it wasn't until the last 10 years that co-ops were starting to hire people with a business degree. So if you're talking about a general manager or management, you know, so often it was hiring from within, from those founding members or folks who worked within a department ages ago when the co-op was starting. And now you're starting to see a lot of folks with letters behind their name applying for these positions. And I think that was something that she also noticed, that this is happening with board members too. And so kind of that evolution of who is running for the board and kind of what that has looked like over time. Most recently, so I've been on the board about 1.5 years, and it has been a busy 1.5 years to be on the board. We most recently, Willy Street Co-op staff voted to unionize in 2019. And so there has been a lot of learning of the role of the board and the role of management to work under those circumstances. Willy Street Co-op also entered into a 3-year contract with Step Up Equity, an organization committed to helping businesses assess, integrate, and implement diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in their business. And so that has been another opportunity for us to come together as a board and with management to make strategic and higher level change within the organization. I wanted to mention, so I think Jeannine at the beginning mentioned that Willy Street Co-op today is at 34,000 owners, $58 million in sales, and that we have 5 sites and 400 employees. In that kind of first stage that Anne was referencing, that would have been, I believe it was 40 members, 6 staff, so just very small. And then I wanted to give, and within 1 year or 2, they got to $1 million in sales, which was a really big growth factor for it. And just to give you another middle of the road benchmark, in 2008, we had 2 sites. We had Willy Street East and that offsite kitchen I mentioned. At that time, we had 115 full-time equivalents for staff, $17.4 million in sales budgeted, and 17,000 members, or 14,000 active members. It has been really fascinating to dig into this history of the co-op and how the board has grown since, you know, we are now at sort of this 46-year point of the board development. And so please ask any questions you might have in the chat, but I believe that it is now my role to go look and see.
And while you're doing that, I can do a little summary of what we talked about and why we thought it was important. We wanted to make it clear that our experience and what we know about other co-ops, particularly for board members, is that the needs of the organization change, and that means that the expectations and the work of the board changes over time. And we're hoping that just by hearing this rather short history of Willy Street, you'll get the idea that boards do change and expectations change, like I said. And we're hoping that you'll be able to consider where you are in your development stage and what things look like outside of the organization, your external circumstances, and identify that what your needs actually are and will be, and to try to fill in the gaps as you move along. What that means is sometimes board members decide to step down. Sometimes you have to attract new people, but it's really important that as directors, you're aware of those changes that happen. It's a normal course of business. And what you can do is reach out to other cooperatives and actually take action in whatever stage you're in to figure out what the skills are that you need as a board or that you need as a director. Get training and look for ideas that are appropriate for the stage that you're in. And even more importantly, look for the ones for the stage you think you'll be in next. So thank you very much for listening to our little history. We've enjoyed sharing it with you. Are there any questions?
Yeah, we can.
Comments?
We know this isn't a shy group. It is hard though being virtual, I know sometimes.
I have a question. Is there diversity on your board with different types of people?
It's a great question. I would say that big picture speaking, there is very little diversity on our board. It's something we are moving towards, and one of the reasons that we engaged Step Up Equity Matters last year to help us identify where we could improve so that more people felt comfortable running for the board and even shopping in our store. But I would say that that's definitely an area of improvement. We're gonna have to work on that before we can get to the blue suits or the black tie or whatever the next one. Great question. Thanks for asking.
I have a quick question.
I was gonna say, I'd like to follow up on that question a little bit. What do you think that you could have done earlier on to diversify your board in an earlier stage of development?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
That's a good question. I think one of the difficulties really early on was that, like I said, the board was a kind of a shadow organization, and they had to beg people to be on the board, and that has happened continually, I think. And trying to convince people to be on the board has been a challenge, no matter who they are. And I think what we're going to have to do and realize that we'll have to do is broaden our networks and and this will probably be a board's responsibility to look to community organizations and try to find someone that is interested in having board experience and interested in this kind of activity, and also is actually the diversity we need on our board right now. We have a minimal amount of age diversity. We have mostly women on the board, and we're all white. So we could diversify in a number of different ways. I could go into all the other things too, but it's a challenge for us, and we're taking it very seriously.
Thank you.
So I have a question. When it comes to incorporating, would it be best to incorporate as a corporation? As I hear there's a co-op type of incorporation also, but we're in a state that doesn't have the co-op structure, would it be best to incorporate as a co-op somewhere else, or use what's available in our state?
I can answer that one too if you want me to. The other women with me need to tell me if I'm talking too much, but
You're doing great, Anne.
For state, people did incorporate oftentimes in Wisconsin because the consumer co-op law is very good here, and they would incorporate here. So that's an option. Or you could consider incorporating as a nonprofit. I think if you incorporate, and some have incorporated as a for-profit, but it depends on the laws in your state. And the best thing that I can do is let you know there are other states that have good co-op laws, and that there are opportunities to do different things, but probably you need to have an attorney help you.
Right. And as far as a nonprofit, would it be better to be a nonprofit than to be a for-profit corporation as a co-op?
I think if Stuart Reed is still with us, he might be able to answer that question better than I can. I'm not a real expert on those structures.
I'm not a lawyer. I only play one on a video. But as a retail, you can't be a co-op and a 501c3 type nonprofit at the same time. They're different, totally different entities, and they have different structures that don't allow for some of what we take for granted as being co-ops. Now, in some states, there are statutes that you can incorporate under that are not for profit at the state level, which is different from being a charitable organization as far as the IRS is concerned. And that is a viable option if that's something you have available. What state are you in, by the way?
Tennessee.
Tennessee. Okay, I'm afraid I don't know. Unfortunately for us, every state has different statutes, and I can't keep track of them all. You really need to find a lawyer who's familiar with cooperative law in Tennessee. And that might not be that easy either, but it's really all I can offer. You should start there. By all means, contact us at FCI, and offline, I can help you find somebody if you don't know of anyone.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
There's a question in the chat asking about a little bit more detail about how we create our board agendas. And Jeannine, as our board president, gets the honor of helping create those and draft those. And I'm thinking she might have some good insights on how we build those and how those come together.
Absolutely. I was just typing a very long-winded response, so it would be much faster to talk about it. So Brenda, thank you. Very, very good question. I would say for the most part, follow a policy register for the rhythms of our board meetings. We have certain policies that we monitor at specific times in the year to make sure that we're doing it within the 12-month cycle, and so that it's not all kind of loaded on at the end of the year. And then there are other pieces to that, or to the annual rhythm that we end up, so they end up being more like topical in nature. So for example, our annual meeting is coming up in July. And so we start talking about like the annual meeting logistics, or we do lots of finance related discussion. We have a quarterly financial update, and then there are naturally discussions around budget towards the end of the fiscal year. And so I would say that our policy register drives a lot of that, but then there are also just kind of annual rhythms that we end up following to help drive what ends up being discussed. And Sarah, would you guys add anything to that?
I might just add that Jeannine mentioned that we meet about 9 times a year. So we do in months that we don't meet, we sometimes build in board education sessions as well. And so we might call on an expert or bring in someone or have a focus area to help us best do our job as a board and help us fill in those gaps. So we try to build in those opportunities as well. And then we do have a, why can't I think of what it's called? Not an annual meeting,
Board retreat?
thank you. A board retreat as well each year.
Yeah, and then we also have, I mean, all of our committees kind of have a similar schedule. So like the policy committee would probably end up following the policy register a little bit more. Our board development committee ends up following our board owner linkage activities. So like our annual meeting and then holidays and how we can connect with owners. Finance committee ends up doing a lot of the reporting schedule. So our quarterly reporting, they see that ahead of time, and then they have to review the audit, things like that.
There was a question in the chat about how we raised money for a short answer they wanted, or how we raised money for the expansions. And it was, here's the short answer, it was a combination of capital that we had saved, borrowed money from a bank, and borrowed money from the members. Jeannine mentioned the bond drive. I think it was Jeannine mentioned the bond drive for expansions, and we borrowed $600,000 from our members.
I believe Kirsten gets credit for owner bonds, but thank you. Kirsten, do you see any questions in the chat that we've missed? I'm kind of losing track.
Yeah, there was one in here about, it says, how does Willy Street deal with issues relating to social justice and equity from a perspective of sourcing? Also, what is a good board size? 9, less, or more? I could maybe help with the sourcing.
Yeah, that would be great.
So my name is Kirsten Moore. I am the Director of Cooperative Services for Willy Street Co-op. So I'm kind of on the operations side of the coin. So related to sourcing, this is something that we've actually been paying really close attention to in the last couple of years. And we've done a couple different things. So there's sourcing for, making sure that people have access to foods, and that we have a variety of different foods at a variety of different price points. So that's more on like the economic justice side of things. And then on the equity and social justice side of things, we have been reaching out more to different vendors and trying to recruit vendors more than letting vendors just come to us. And we also have done a lot with new and up and coming vendors. We have a program that has been kind of on a hiatus because of COVID, because a lot of it involves sampling. That's called the Retail Ready Lab, where we have brand new vendors who are thinking about going into the retail setting, basically test out the retail setting for a while. And they do active sampling in our stores, and our customers provide feedback about the products and the packaging and the price points. And we work with them on their packaging, and we work with them on the things that they need to do to get retail ready. And then they get some shelf space, and they get to work with us as their first retailer. In the last year, we added 22 new local vendors, which was an 11% increase over fiscal year 19. I don't have off the top of my head a statistic on how many were vendors of color or female vendors, but I can tell you that the majority of them were. So those are some of the things that we've been doing on the sourcing end of things. As far as a good board size, I will let the board answer that question.
And do you want to answer that one? I think that you have the most board experience.
I do. I was on a board that had 45 members. I don't recommend that. It's very slow going, making a decision, and it's very hard to keep the board involved. I think on all the boards I've been on, probably 9 seems to be a good number. I'm on one that has 11 right now, and that works, but it's just a little bit unwieldy. Smaller, when you get down to 5 or so, it's just not, if you're a fairly diverse organization, it's just not enough diversity, I think, to represent the breadth of the membership. But it's all what works best for the organization.
Couple other questions that came into the chat. Let's see. Could you tell us a little bit about your board retreat? What is included and what is the purpose?
Oh,
A great question. Yeah, so thanks Beverly for that. We plan once a year to have, usually we plan for a full day. This year, because of COVID, we did just 2 smaller sessions. But what is included? We take that time to discuss those bigger topics that are a little bit challenging to tackle in a board meeting, or that require a little bit more planning, focus, discussion. And so that's what the purpose of those is to have our undivided attention for a longer period of time and kind of dig a little deeper into maybe an area that we've identified as a desire for us to learn more about, or maybe a need. But that's what we do, is include topics that are a little bit more difficult to talk about in a 2-hour end of the day board meeting. We usually take a full Saturday, and I think in the past it's even been a full Saturday and a full Sunday. I think it also gives the board the opportunity to connect in a way that maybe you can't when you're doing business as usual in a board meeting. Would either of you add anything to that? Board retreats?
I was trying to unmute. Oh, go ahead, Sarah. Well,
Sure. I was just gonna give some examples from like the last year and a half. I guess I've been through 2 now. So we with strategic planning being a desire of the board, we focused on strategic planning, how to have like generative decision-making conversations. We've had folks come in and give orientation on just kind of co-op structure and co-op law or co-op trends, or things to just get the board aligned and thinking, getting them in the framework of, since it's a volunteer board and not everybody has a different background and experience with co-ops, with food co-ops or food systems, or with community engagement, or sort of these strategic thinking, and so they can cross the board in those sorts of ways.
Can I ask you something? In reference to the retreats, do you go to relax? Because I did get a chance to go to the food co-op, up and coming food co-op. I'm Vivian Stewart. I'm with the Rosa Parks Farmers Market. We're a seasonal market. And so I did get a chance for the first time last year to go. And it was a great experience. The people, the education, my gracious. And I had to write a report and all the classes you went to. So I did get a chance also. Naturally, we had the tour to Willy, the Willy Street Co-op.
Great.
I was so impressed. So, but I also know, without knowing, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And so what I want to know, do you go on a retreat that you can relax, not talk about? Maybe you can have a retreat that can be for business if you want to do that, but at least have a retreat where you can have rest and relaxation. You need that for your brain and for just yourself.
Those are words of wisdom. Can you come be our board president?
It was a big deal when we went to a retreat center that's affiliated with the University of Wisconsin. And it's very, very comfortable place, and they have fabulous food and a wonderful constant snack bar that's open the whole time you're meeting. And I think that we weren't consciously relaxing, but it was so comfortable and so pleasant that I think we did relax, and as much as you can if you're talking about food industry or strategic planning or what. But it did. I think it worked, and it was a different situation for us. We usually were meeting in the meeting where we usually meet as a board. So going somewhere else was a good change for us too.
Wonderful. You deserve it. Thank you.
I saw one more question in the chat, and I'll also do a quick time check that there's 6 more minutes. How do you keep the board engaged with member owners and staff? Do you have any staff members on the board? What do you do if board members don't live up to their responsibilities?
Those are really good questions. Thank you, Ron, for that. Do Ann or Sarah, do either of you feel like tackling this?
You can go first.
Okay. So how do we keep the board members engaged with member owners and staff? That is admittedly a challenge with our size, and even more so with COVID. I think we oftentimes would rely on in-person communication. So the board has a board development committee, which is responsible for owner linkage. And we try to be present in the store on a semi-regular basis. So if owners want to meet a board member or have a discussion or ask a question, that we are there for that. We also have an email address that can be, owners can send us emails at any time, and we try to respond in a timely manner to that. And so that way, if there's something that comes up, we can be accessed fairly easily. I would say that those are 2 ways that we keep the board engaged with member owners. I might stop there and let Sarah and Ann answer some of the other questions.
I was checking the chat and didn't hear if you mentioned this, but I know for a fact that the board writes an article every year in our news, or every month in our news letter, which is quite extensive, and it's more like a newspaper that comes out once a month to all the members, which is a critical part of the way the entire co-op stays in touch with the members. And the board has a column in that paper, and the reason I'm talking about it is I just turned mine in today. And each one of us has written at least one, and Jeannine writes several. And I think that actually it's surprising. A number of people tell me that they were reading the paper. Somebody just told me the other day they read it cover to cover and appreciated what was in the board column. So you never know. Board work isn't the most exciting thing to report on. We met, we talked, right? And then we went home. But so it's hard to have it be interesting for the members. But I think this board does a much better job of linking to members than many of the co-ops I've been involved with.
That's great. I might expand on that a little bit, or kind of follow the rest of the question. We don't currently have any staff members on our board, but our bylaws do allow for up to 2 staff members to be on the board. Those staff members are not allowed to serve in an officer role, but our bylaws do allow staff members on our board. And then the last part of that question was, what do you do if board members don't live up to their responsibilities? We have a code of conduct that all board members receive and sign at the beginning of every year. And we, and then we have a piece of the code of conduct that says if you have missed more than I think it's 3 meetings in a year that the board can vote by a 2/3 majority to ask you to leave the board. In my tenure, we have never done that. We typically have had board members be fairly engaged, but we do have kind of checks and balances in place should we have a board member who's really just having a hard time maintaining the commitment of boardship. Andrew, Sarah, would you add anything to that?
That was well stated. I think some of our monitoring reports touch on this aspect too. We capture it through surveys and asking board. There's certain questions that we ask that gives an opportunity for board members to provide feedback on if they think everyone is contributing and doing their work too. So yep, just I guess echoing the check and balance within our system.
I don't see any other questions in the chat.
No?
Everybody was waiting for that 5 o'clock. Did a great job of getting us straight through the end.
I have a question.
Oh yeah.
Hi, Ann. It's good to see you. It was a nice presentation you gave on Willy Street's history, and I've been a member of the co-op for many years. This is the first I've learned of there used to be a workers' collective. Can you tell me your understanding of why the collective dissolved around 1979?
I would have to guess, Brian. As you know, I didn't come to Madison until the mid 80s. But the history was that there were so many difficulties, and particularly loss of money in 79 and 80. And then this sort of tension between the board, the more activist board that won in the contested election. I think that board decided somebody decided, and I would imagine it was the board, that they needed to have a general manager, that the collective wasn't serving their needs as well as it should. But I think it was under the stress of losing money and this difference of purpose between the staff collective and the board, the revived board. As you know, in co-ops, losing money does often institute change quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I had heard from one of the earlier members also that it was just really hard to make decisions in the worker collective model. They were operating on consensus, and even deciding what kind of cash register to get or whether they should get a cash register was a massive hurdle in the collective model.
Interesting. Well, thank you everyone for coming and attending. It was great to be here and answer your questions. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to us at any time. All 3 of us have email addresses and would be glad to help out. With that, I might go ahead and close down our webinar. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thanks, take care.
You too.